what does it actually mean to have productive discourse when people disagree?
We're living in an era where we don't just disagree with our neighbors, we've stopped believing they're even worth talking to.
In the age of algorithms and digital echo chambers, we feel the need to outperform others in conversations, even if it sacrifices our friendships and relationships. Lincoln Warren, a house divided against itself cannot stand.
We are 3 juniors in high school, and this is Fair Point, a podcast where we speak with educators, scholars, and leaders who think deeply about democratic values and public dialogue. We hope to bridge gaps and foster mutual respect across communities by educating people on the importance of peaceful dialogue and providing them with the tools necessary to engage in and facilitate it. Welcome to the Fair Point Podcast. We are your hosts, Jesse Horowitz, Davis Gorman, and Matthias Gitron-Beer.
Today's guest is Dr. Jonathan Zimmerman, a historian of education and professor at the University of Pennsylvania. Dr. Zimmerman studies how schools and universities uphold free speech and democratic values. He is the author of several books on education controversies, including Free Speech and Why You Should Give a Damn. He is also a frequent op-ed contributor to the New York Times, the Washington Post, and other national newspapers and magazines. Zimmerman received the 2019 Open Inquiry Leadership Award from Heretics Academy, which promotes viewpoint diversity in higher education. We're incredibly honored to talk with him about what productive discourse already looks like, where it breaks down, and what role education plays in sustaining a healthy democracy. So, Jesse?
Dr. Zimmerman, thank you for joining us. Before we get started, for our listeners, can you tell us a little bit about your areas of work and scholarship?
Yes. I'm a professor of education history at the University of Pennsylvania. I'm a former high school teacher and Peace Corps volunteer. And I've spent my career studying the way that Americans have argued over schools and universities and what they should do and what they should be. I'm also an op-ed journalist, and I'm a columnist for the Philadelphia Inquirer and for a bunch of other newspapers.
Dr. Zimmerman, what is an experience that has either shaped the way you think about free speech or that exemplifies its importance?
Well, the experience is the one I have every day, Matthias, which is teaching. I come at this as an educator, and I succeed insofar as my students learn a lot, and I fail if they learn a little. My job is to maximize their learning. If I do my job well, they learn, and if I don't do my job well, they don't learn. And your question is, what experience has made me an advocate for free speech? It's being a teacher, because I understand, because I've seen it every day, that if people are afraid to say what they think, or they don't feel like they have the right to, or they don't feel like anybody will hear them, then all of our learning suffers. The entire premise of modern education is exchange. The way we learn is through dialogue with each other. And if we're biting our tongues or we're walking in fear, that's not going to work. Please understand, there are other, I know there are other defenses of free speech, but you asked me about my own experiences and what made me committed to it, and that's your answer.
In terms of any experiences that might have exemplified its importance, as opposed to how you got into it, or I guess really that is importance.
Well, no, let me give you an example that I experienced not in my own classroom, but in an educational setting that I think speaks to exactly this problem. In February of last year, after Trump came back to the White House, I was invited to a meeting of scholars of education in Washington. And there was a panel, as you might expect, about the challenges of Trump. And the challenges of Trump to universities and to freedom are radical. Not just Trump, but state legislatures, usually led by Republicans. I mean, to take an example, the Stop Woke Act in Florida, the attorney for Florida interpreted it to mean that professors can't criticize the governor. Seriously. Yeah, he said that in court. The judge says, so does this mean that if you're a professor, you're not allowed to criticize the governor? And the guy said, yeah. And, I'm not going to enumerate all the different challenges that Trump has created to freedom, including the idea that no matter what you think about DEI, you can't use that language or you can't post it anywhere, that you can't teach something called gender theory, even though nobody seems to know what that is, for critical race theory. So this is what the panel was about. And I agree with almost all of it. And so after the panel, nobody was going to do this, so I had to. I raised my hand and I said, look, these challenges are real. I think you articulated them well, and I agree with all of them. But instead of just circling the wagons, shouldn't we also, as educators, be looking in the mirror and asking what we might have done or not to bring about this moment? Well, there was silence, and then finally a younger scholar, and now everyone is younger than me, she raised her hand and she says, so I just want to say that I was really offended and harmed by Professor Zimmerman's use of the term circle the wagons, which for me resonates with, the worst histories of Native American removal and genocide. Now, I want to be clear. I have nothing against her at all. She was raising her voice. I support that. Here's what troubles me, and this, I think, hopefully illustrates the problem. What troubles me is that afterwards, no one said anything. Literally nothing. And eventually the moderator says, well, thank you for reminding us that we have to, use the right language when we talk about these subjects. So let's review. We begin with a panel about how Trump is harming free speech, and we end with a warning to watch our words. And afterwards, several people come up to me and said, what was that about? And I'll be honest with you, I have no time for them. Because what I didn't say, but I felt like saying is, why are you saying this to me now? Why didn't you raise an objection during the session? And the answer is they were afraid. And they thought that they too would be cast in a negative light. And look, all of our learning suffers in situations like that. If we were true to our values of freedom, this is what would have happened. The moderator first would have said to the objecting scholar, tell me more about that. Tell me more about why you object to that term and what it means to you. Then the moderator would turn to me and would have said, so John, you're a historian. Respond to this. How do we or how should we choose the phrases that we choose when we talk about either the present or the past? And then she would have opened it up to the audience. You know how much of that happened? None. Mm-hmm. So that's what I'm talking about, right? Once you create situations where people don't want to speak or afraid to speak, learning suffers. I'm actually curious about what her objections were, and I would have liked to hear more about it. And did I?
Yeah.
No, I didn't. So I learned nothing. And neither did anybody there, except you better watch your words.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think that really speaks to the fact that in order to have productive dialogue, in order to advance ourselves in communication with each other, we're going to have to go through these hard times. And as you mentioned, words do hurt. And as a society, I think we're going to have to regard that as a truth and as a difficulty too, as a challenge to get to the goal of healthy discourse.
No, look, I agree with what Matthias just said, and I think that the scholar was hurt by my use of that term. I'm not happy about that. I never am. But I want to know more about it, right?
Exactly.
I want to know more about what she was thinking. But when you create situations where people are disincentivized to speak, you don't learn what people are thinking. The only thing I know is that it pissed her off. I don't know anything more. And that's not because of Trump or Ron DeSantis. Let's be clear, right? That's because of us and the cultures we've made at our educational institutions, which are often not friendly to this kind of dialogue.
I'm guessing that a lot of people are anti-Trump at this event, or about his...
Oh, yeah. They're scholars of education, each and every one, including me.
So we're seeing that, we're hearing about Trump limiting free speech, but at the same time, on the left, there's also this type of, maybe it's not really, it's definitely limiting speech in terms of how she was objecting you, but also kind of this sense of being afraid to speak out.
Yes. And also, let me be clear, I'm not equating these two things. You hear the term false equivalence a lot these days, and I think that that's a real danger. What Trump is doing is not the same as what we're doing, and the reason is he's the president. And he has vastly more power. He has the power of the federal state behind him. But what I will say is, if we want to challenge his attacks on freedom, which I think we should, we have to get our own house in order. I'm not saying that what we're doing is as bad as Trump or as meaningful or as destructive because he's the president. I'm not the president, right? That's different. But I think the principle is similar. And I think the only way that you can fight Trump is by adhering consistently to the principle of free and open exchange, which he is doing so much to destroy.
Yeah, it's as if the Congress has basically ceded all their power to Trump at this point. Do you think that the scared sense on the left is like preventing them from this, or is it just the power of the Republicans that's dominating the government?
Well, look, I mean,
Trump
Jesse, that's a much broader question about politics in Washington, right? I mean, that transcends the boundaries of all of this. The one thing that I will say, though, is that I think the only effective way to challenge Trump is to be different from him. There are a lot of my friends who are in the resistance, quote unquote, but they're kind of acting like Trump. And here's how. He calls people morons and dummies and losers and low IQ. And they call them racists and sexists and transphobes and homophobes. I think that's kind of Trumpian insofar as it just substitutes name calling for argument, right? Let's just call someone a name, right? And it's inimical to learning, you know. And so, you know, one of the pleas I'm always making to my students and my colleagues is, if you don't like Trump, don't be like Trump. Don't be like him. Yeah. Don't be like him.
Two wrongs don't make it right.
Yeah.
Well, absolutely. All of our moms taught us that, I think. But, you know, I think we're all forgetting it. And you know who's really forgetting it? The Republicans. You know, they used to complain about this thing called cancel culture. And now they're the cancelers in chief. They're like, no, you can't say from the river to sea, Palestine must be free.
And you can't teach this in a history class.
Yes, because it hurts my feelings. You were very mean to me. You hurt my feelings. I'm a Republican snowflake. It's like, weren't you complaining about Democratic snowflakes before? And now you're just a Republican snowflake.
So what do you think is causing this cultural change in which we can no longer handle free speech, or it's harder to handle?
Well, I mean, Davis, I'm not sure we can, quote, no longer handle it. I think there are a lot of people that want it. I think the problem is that we don't have good models for it. So, you know, I think a lot about my students' experience, and my students are not that much older than you. I taught a freshman seminar last term, and they were born in 2006. Davis, what year were you born?
2009.
Okay, so you were born during the first. Yeah, all you were born right when Obama became president the first time, right? And I'm sure you have no memories of that. You may barely have memories of him being president at all, right? Because in the second term, you're like 4, 5, 6. So, you know, you're Trump people. Like, that's who you are. Like, you grew up in the era of Donald Trump. And that's an era of astonishing polarization and mutual recrimination. So what this means is you grow up in a time where you go to YouTube or you look at cable television, and what you see is people just shouting invective at each other, right? Calling each other names. By the way, just like he does, right?
Yeah.
And I think people that grow up in that environment, that's what they maybe, I'm not talking about the three of you, but I'm just talking about in general, that's what you learn politics is. Mm-hmm. And the only way we're going to interrupt that is through education, is through starting, like, you guys are too old, by the way. Like, we got to start this shit in first grade. Seriously. You know? Do you know that in Finland, in first grade, they start teaching the kids how to distinguish between a real and a fake website?
Really?
Yeah. First grade. They just give them examples, and they're like, okay, which one do you think is real and why? Like, what's the characteristic of something that's real? And the kids can do it. Of course they can. But only if you teach them, right? Mm-hmm. None of this is natural. I think what's natural, frankly, is to hate on each other. That's the most natural thing in the world. The unnatural thing, and the reason we need education, is to do something different from that. So I think our educational institutions, they have to teach us a different way of exchange.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think something that's interesting that's really struck out to me is that my teacher doesn't let us use the word identity in our class because that's just such a bland and general term. And you're talking about Trump saying moron or people saying homophobe, that's that same type of thing where you're generalizing people to these one-word answers to bigger problems, and that is kind of
which
taking away the
aren't
complexities
answers
that
at
are there.
all. And you're also stigmatizing them. Look, there is such a thing as homophobia and transphobia. There is. It's real. And racism and sexism, right? I don't think anyone that studies America could reasonably deny that, okay? But it doesn't therefore follow that everyone you disagree with is a bigot. So, to take the trans issue, here at University of Pennsylvania, where I work, it's a very, very controverted thing because we had Leah Thomas, right, the trans female swimmer on the team. And look, some of the people that criticized her were straight out transphobic. Like if you call her Liar Thomas or you call her a man, you're just talking shit. You're just being mean. But it doesn't therefore follow that everyone who thought she shouldn't be on the women's team is a transphobe. Some of those people were themselves trans athletes, right? There is absolutely a reasonable argument for her not being on the team. Again, it's complicated. So what I'm trying to say is, in the same breath, I think we have to acknowledge that there are bigots out there, because there are. But we also have to acknowledge that not everyone who disagrees with us is a bigot. And we should be able to do those two things at the same time.
Yeah.
I guess the follow-up question there is that if we're going to classify them as a bigot, how do we still listen to them? How do we still give them respect? Or
well, look, that's a great question. And to be clear, Matthias, I'm not really interested in classifying anyone, to be honest. I don't want to sit up in Mount Olympus and say, like, you're a bigot, you're not a bigot. But I should also tell you that I have encountered bigots in my life, right? I'm a newspaper writer. And if you have a Jewish last name, you will encounter anti-Semites. You just will. It doesn't happen every day, but it does. And there are a couple telltale signs, but generally beginning an email with, what kind of name is Zimmerman? That's a good tip-off. Like, it's Jehovah's Witness, motherfucker. Like, what do you think it is? And why are you asking, like, you anti-Semitic piece of shit? And when I was younger, that's the sort of thing I would say. It does no good. Now, you know what I do? Deleted, blocked. So again, it's a free country, right? They can say horrible anti-Semitic shit, but I'm not going to engage with them. I don't see any reason to.
Yeah, that's fair.
Like, what would be the point?
Exactly. I think that's definitely a fair point. But, like, for example, to give an example of maybe like a school situation, if a student at a private school were to draw, for example, a swastika on a bathroom door, how would you recommend, like, for example, a school administrator handle that situation?
Well, look, that's a great question, and it's a really relevant question because we've seen a lot of that in the past couple of years. I think it's fair to say that in the era of Donald Trump, some of the guardrails against terrible shit like that have come down. Some people have felt a little bit more empowered to do things like, wear a Confederate flag to school. I think in the case of the swastika, the most important thing is to actually have a conversation about it. I'm not interested in slapping that kid's hand. I'm interested in teaching that kid and the others around her or him. So what I would do if I found that, and I found out who did it, is the first thing that I would do is I would have a conversation with that person and their family. And I would begin it with asking questions. All right? Why did you do this? What do you think this represents? What was your purpose? The next thing I would do is I would have a school assembly in which what I did was I showed some video about what the swastika is, where it comes from, show some movies of Nuremberg rallies, right? Actually, I don't know, learn something? Like, what a concept, right? Who'd have thunk it? So this should be a learning opportunity, right? I think too often in this instance, and this is part of the problem with this sort of free speech, let's just say motif, is the question becomes, should we allow this or not? And I think that's the wrong question, right? I mean, we shouldn't certainly turn a blind eye to it, and that is not what I'm suggesting, right? But I don't think the right question is, should we allow or not? I think the right question is, what should we do about it? And my answer is, We should use it to learn. Again, that's my job, right? My job is to help people learn. So if people are learning more, I'm doing my job well. And if they're learning less, I'm doing my job poorly. And if all I did was just, paint it over and suspend the kid, I don't think people would learn very much. Except like if you do that, you're going to get suspended. And that's something, right? But it's not nearly enough.
Got it. So this student vandalized, and now them and the rest of the school has a lot to learn. Is what you're saying?
Yes. Yeah, and let's talk about this. Let's talk about these symbols. Let's talk about their history.
Is there a point like where you draw the line between protecting, this kid's ability to write this symbol on the wall or say something hateful while still maintaining a functional learning environment?
Well, look, I mean, I'm not saying that the kid should be allowed, again, to go back to that, to paint a swastika, right? In the hypothetical, right, he's already done it, okay? So it's there. And Matthias's question was, what do we do, right? And I think as part of the discussion, I think it would be interesting to talk about why it may be hard for, say, Jewish students to learn well in a room with swastikas in it. I think that's an entirely legitimate line of questioning, right? And again, we should do it. And when I say do it, we should talk about it. That's our job.
Yeah. You talk about maximizing the learning of students a lot, which makes sense.
Yeah.
Professor.
It's my job.
Right. I have a question about that. In terms of when you're teaching, or when a teacher generally is teaching, should they make their political views clear and encourage disagreement to those views, or do you think they should try to keep their views more ambiguous at the potential risk of having them subtly heard?
Well, if you have the pure joy of reading this book, you'll see that in some ways it's structured around Davis's question. And it borrows from Alexander Meiklejohn, who's not somebody that people read anymore, but they should. He was the leading civil libertarian of the early 20th century. And he spent most of his career addressing Davis's question. Should a teacher disclose what they believe? And Meiklejohn's answer was yes. And this is why. He said, the teacher's job is to teach exchange, right, and dialogue. It's to teach how to be political in a civil and an informed way. How can the teacher do that if the teacher is pretending that they're up on Mount Olympus, just looking down on all of this? If they're pretending that they're not a political actor, right? They're kind of lying, right? But in the same breath, and this is where it gets super complicated, he said, yes, they should disclose what they think. But in the same breath, they must make it clear that nobody else in the room is required to agree with them. Because if they don't, then they're no longer an educator. They're a propagandist. But this is hard, right? Because the teacher is the adult in the room. The teacher has a lot of authority and power. The teacher is evaluating the students. So in a way, because they're younger and they have less power, they're going to be incentivized to agree with the teacher. And this is a problem, and it's something I grapple with in the classroom all the time. To this day, I teach college students, but again, they're not that much older than you. And I introduce them to Meiklejohn the very first class. And I just tell them, this is where my head's at. I don't want to pretend that I'm neutral, because I'm not. But at the same time, I don't want you to feel in any way constrained or required to echo me. And these are both real things, and they're hard. When I was a high school teacher, you guys might find this funny, and this is way back even before human beings walked erect. This would be in 1986 or 87. And well before the internet boom and before really, anything. The students had this underground chart that was called How to Get an A in Ms. or Mr.'s Class. And it sort of looked like a Google Doc today, although there were no Google Docs. Again, very dark and primitive time. There were no Google Docs. But the leading one for Mr. Zimmerman, How to Get an A in Mr. Zimmerman's Class, say you disagree with him. But see, this is, the fool says to King Lear, this is not altogether fool, my lord, right? I mean, this is complicated, right? Because if they're now just disagreeing with me, it's no different than actually agreeing with me in the sense that they're just incentivized to behave in a certain way so they can succeed in my class, right?
Yeah.
These are just different sides of the same coin. And it's not good, right?
Yeah.
I want them to come to their own reasoned opinions, which may or may not echo my own. And I think they had gotten the idea that the way to succeed in Zimmerman's class is not to echo him, it's just to say the opposite. But that's no better, right? Not really, if you actually want them to think.
Mm-hmm.
The teacher is expressing their view not in order to propagandize you or to persuade you in any way. The teacher is expressing their view to be honest, right? And to model a certain kind of behavior. The other saying that Michael John had was, slaves cannot teach freedom, right? That is, if you're just biting your tongue and pretending that you're neutral, how are you going to actually model the behaviors we've been talking about on this call, right? Then you're like a ref instead of a player, right? And it's kind of bullshit, right? Now, I don't go as far as Michael John. Michael John said, like, you should disclose. And that's not my view. I think it should be up to the teacher whether to disclose, which is different. And I think that's all context dependent, right? There may be circumstances where it would be useful for the teacher to do so, and there may be circumstances where it wouldn't be. And I think age matters a lot here, too. I mean, like, you guys are juniors and seniors. That's different from being like a fifth grader, right? And I think that matters, right? So I think it should be part of the professional judgment of the teacher whether to do that. Again, and the goal should always be the same, which is for people to learn. And I think with the context is going to vary, and so there may be times where you want to do that, and there may be times when you don't.
I also feel, though, that even if the teacher is not openly disclosing, their political beliefs, I feel like students still have a natural tendency to sort of assume what the
they do.
teachers might do. I think it still causes the same sort of negative outcome in that way.
Yeah, and look, one of the things that Michael John pointed out is even if you claim you're neutral, they're kind of going to know, right?
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, they're not dumb. They're as smart as you. And you all have lived this, right? You can figure it out. It's not rocket science, right? Even if they don't come out and say, I voted for Kamala Harris, all right? There are some indices that you can very easily interpret, right? And so I think Michael John's point is, like, why be coy, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Like why pretend?
Yeah. Before we get back to the conversation, a quick reminder. If you're enjoying Fair Point, leaving a 5-star rating and sharing the podcast with those interested is completely free, and it makes a huge difference for us. Every rating and share helps grow the community and amplify our mission. Thanks for listening.
Let's say you're in a group of students with a class. Like Matthias and I have a club, and sometimes we notice that when we get to certain topics where most of the group agrees with one perspective. What do you think is some advice for us or for a student who disagrees to speak as a reason to speak up because like that's important to the whole group?
Well, first of all, I think that if there's a teacher in the room, the teacher's job is to try to elicit a different perspective, right? And I do a devil's advocate thing if I can't get any student to elicit it. I've had classes where people think I'm a Republican because there aren't any Republicans in the room. And so I have to cosplay as one. And I don't mind that. I can do it. So I think that unanimity is generally the enemy of education. When everyone's agreeing with each other, they're typically not learning very much. And it's boring, right? Like, yes, I hate Trump too. Wow. Fascinating. Hot take, And so I think the job is to try to bring out other opinions, because even when it seems that everybody is agreeing, often they're not, because, again, some people are biting their tongues. And look, I do have some Trump voting students at Penn. There aren't many. The DP, our newspaper, did a poll, and it seems it's about 90%, 10%. But Penn's a big place, right? There are 2,500 students in a class, so that means there are 10,000 students. What that means is there are 1,000 Trumpers walking the land. And I want them to speak up in my class, precisely because I'm not a Trumper. And because I think a lot of my students haven't actually interacted with somebody that voted for Trump. But it's hard, right? Because they come out to me in my office with the door shut. And I'm like, don't live a lie. It gets better, just be yourself. But they're like, easy for you to say, buddy. And I get that too. They're like, do you know how I'd be canceled if the people in the class knew I voted for Trump? I think that you guys probably haven't voted yet. You're not the age of majority, but it will be soon. And so my students are voters, and that matters. And look, I get it. I don't like it, but I get it. When I was 18 years old, I cared a lot about what other 18-year-olds thought, especially about me. And I think any 18-year-old that says they don't is probably lying, Mm-hmm. And so I get it, right? And it's so easy for me. Like, I'm a 65-year-old white guy with tenure. Like, I don't give a shit if somebody goes onto the internet and talks shit about me. I mean, I really don't. I'm not saying I like it, but whatever, right? But when I was 18, I would have. And so I understand it. And what I just try over and over again just to create situations in my classroom where I say, look, you've seen the numbers. There are roughly 1,000 Trump voters at Penn. I think we should hear from them because I think we will learn from them. And again, back to that, right? We're trying to learn here. And if we're not talking, we Democrats, to people who voted for Trump, we're going to miss a learning opportunity. To me, that's the heart of the matter.
I also think another interesting thing that may add to this lack of speaking up is I think a lot of people view Trump as a populist, and so a lot of people just naturally gravitate to Trump and maybe are not as well versed in his, so he's banning visas for colleges. Oh, I have a better chance of getting into college. A lot of people think stuff like that. And, how do you view students like that who kind of just gravitate towards service level ideas and speak out about those, but may not be as well educated on the complexities of the topics they're discussing?
Well, Jesse, the reason I'm laughing is that was me. And that was everyone who's 17. I mean, who's deeply informed when they're 17?
That's a good point.
I mean, some people for sure, not many. I mean, you don't know enough. So of course you're talking from the hip or from your rear end, right? I get it. And that's okay, by the way. That is also how we learn, right? By trying on things, even when you're not sure of yourself, seeing how they land, seeing who corrects you, right? I don't feel, and let me just be clear, I wasn't trying to make fun of everybody. I don't feel like every 17-year-old who participates in politics should know everything about politics. No, right? You're learning. And the way you do that is by trying things on. And I take your point that a lot of it is ill-informed, but when I was 17, it was radically ill-informed. I had no idea what I was talking about.
You mentioned posting on social media earlier, and now we're talking about being radically misinformed. Do you have any thoughts on how social media and the culture around that has impacted someone's willingness to kind of say whatever is being reinforced?
Yes, many thoughts. I'm so glad it did not exist when I was a kid. Just so glad. I think my life was so much better. Just because, again, when you're an adolescent, you are peer-oriented. I think every honest adolescent is. You care about what other people think about you, and you're trying to sort of place yourself vis-a-vis them. But with social media now, there's this whole other thing you have to manage, this whole other persona, right, that's out there in the world. And there are strangers looking at you. And your TikToks and your handles and judging you. I get why so many young people don't want to engage in that. Because, like, what if what you said could get you maligned by like 1,000 or 10,000 or 100,000 people? I mean, like, that seems really scary to me, like, super scary.
Yeah, it's,
And
it's definitely one of the hardest things to navigate. Because at the
yes,
same time, you're hearing stuff that anybody could post, and they don't really have control over what gets posted. But at other times, it can just be an echo chamber of your same ideas. So it goes both ways in terms of hearing yourself, but also hearing opposing viewpoints. You don't really know what you're going to get. And then you could say something that could end your future.
Exactly.
or I think more precisely that would make you feel as a 17-year-old that you have ended your future, right? Because it probably wouldn't, but it would certainly feel that way, right?
Yeah.
And I get that. I totally get that, and I have empathy for that. I do. It's so easy for me to say, oh, don't worry, whatever, right? No, I think that's super precious. Yeah.
Yeah. And what's also interesting is that characters like Nick Fuentes are becoming kind of like a joke to the point where people are sending videos of Nick Fuentes because of, he's saying these crazy things that, you may not even believe in, but you're getting fed this information just because it's such a famous clip and he's saying these crazy things.
And it's worth asking how many people think it's funny and how many people think it's real, right?
Yeah,
That's
and he's getting these platforms because of it.
That's right. That's right. I mean, it's interesting you mentioned Nick Fuentes because, I also think that what's happened and what Jesse is pointing to is just the way that social media has eroded the guardrails that used to exist, the informal guardrails around this. Like, you just can't, I mean, you can, but you shouldn't go into a room that has Jewish people in it, or any people actually, and say that the Holocaust didn't happen. Like, I mean, you can, it's a free country, right? But it's a really horrible thing to say. But now it seems like so many of our inhibitions around these things have been taken away. And so we've always had Holocaust denial in this country. Like, there have always been Holocaust deniers, but they didn't have the kind of presence that Nick Fuentes has. And it's also worth noting, this is a little off point, but since you brought it up, I want to underscore it. This is what I think is so hollow about the Trump administration's attacks on anti-Semitism on campus. Forgive me if I rather doubt that the president who has welcomed Nick Fuentes to his home for dinner and continues to refuse to denounce him is really worried about anti-Semitism on campus. I'm a little bit skeptical of that, actually hugely skeptical of it.
Yeah.
Have you noticed, or do you think there's a positive correlation between sort of cancel culture and the expansion of social media?
Oh, totally. I mean, look, let's just take a garden variety example. I mean, this was a long time ago in your lives, but not in mine. When Trump was elected the first time in 2016, there was a student who I've since gotten to know, just because of what I do at Bryn Mawr, who posted, again, to Matthias's point, on social media, a note saying, hey, there's a Trump rally out in Westchester. Is anyone going? Because I need a ride. She was so vilified, not just by people at Bryn Mawr, but all over America, that she dropped out of school. Like, without social media, that just couldn't have happened because nobody would have known, or like 3 people would have known, right? So, yeah.
But I feel like in our day and age, as teenagers, wanting our peer validation, as you said, you were an 18-year-old with the same goals. I feel in my view, it's hard to distance myself from social media just because everyone's on it. It's in the hot.
Totally. Look, I completely get it. And I would be on it too. I mean, Matthias, my question isn't why people are on it 17 hours a day. It's why they aren't on it 24 hours a day. I mean, look, when I was 17, what did I really care about? Who's cute? Who's cool? Who's going out with whom? That's what I cared about. I mean, there were other things, right? Like I did read some books and I had some other interests, but that was pretty much it. That's what you talk about. Who's cute, who's cool, who's going out with whom. And that's social media. That's what it is. It's 24/7. right?
Yeah.
And so I get it, man. It's crack, right? I mean, I would be on it all the time.
Completely different eras.
And it really just seeps into the culture. You
Yeah.
don't even notice it.
Right.
Yeah, and we have no reference because we've only been living in this day and age, so we can't reference your childhood.
That's right. No, and you are, I mean, I don't know if you're going to like this term, but you're Trump kids. Like, you grew up in the era of Trump. And let's remember, Trump's our first social media president. Like, let's not forget that, right? I mean, that's been so normalized. Just the idea that the president of the United States is going to tweet everybody some shit, right? I mean, that's just Trump. Like, nobody else did that, right? Yeah. And it's kind of like being governed by an adolescent, really. I mean, it is, you know, I mean, he, you know, there's no impulse control, right? You just say whatever you want. And he even uses adolescent terms. I mean, I just love this. We're a really hot country now. Really? Like, that's just like what a teenager would say. Oh, she's really hot. Yeah. Really? Like, how old are you? Yeah. So he's our first social media president. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Without social media, he would never have become president. Yeah.
Yeah. And not only that, you see the same edits you'll see of sports players that you see on your TikTok are the same format and type of videos of ICE raids. And it's the White House who's producing these videos and putting them on TikTok.
That's right.
And you get them on your feed, and it's just people getting torn out of their homes. And it's desensitized because it is in the same format as you'd see Stephen Curry shooting threes.
That's right. And we haven't talked about AI yet because some of it is also fake, right? I mean, to your point, some of these mashups are real, but some of it is just fake. And how do you distinguish, right? Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much for listening to our first episode of Fairpoint. Join us next time with Dr. Stephanie Knox to discuss how inner peace cultivates outer peace and dialogue. Before we get back to the conversation, a quick reminder. If you're enjoying Fairpoint, leaving a